And it's record live time again. Thank you for joining us, and let us know where you're watching us from. Zanita, as always, great to have you with us this week.
It's a pleasure.
And we are joined by a very special guest today, Maryellen, friend of the show, former co-host of Record Live. It is wonderful to see you again. How are you? And tell us a little bit, if you can, about what you've been up to lately.
Sure. Well, it's so lovely to be back. I have a very soft spot for Record Live, obviously. So let me think. What am I up to? Well, I just got back from a trip to the USA for 3 weeks. So yeah, feeling a little bit kind of jet lagged-ish, just a bit tired at the moment. But yeah, my husband had a work trip over there, and so I joined him, and I had some work stuff to do. But yeah, at the moment, I am doing a bunch of different creative projects for different, mostly parts of the Adventist Church, but also some other organizations. A lot of design and illustration stuff at the moment, actually, which is exciting. But yeah, bit of a jack of all trades.
Awesome. I had someone recently, Maryellen, actually the mother of a Olympic medallion winner. She said that she really loved watching you on the show when you did Record Live and when you were a host, and she said she really misses your conversations and your insight. I think she really just gravitated to what you said. So you are missed on this show, and it was great to have you back for another episode.
That's so lovely. It's wild that an Olympic medalist's mum watched the show. That's amazing. So cool.
Anyway, we are talking about Sister Betsy today. I only heard of what this was a few months ago. Prior to the article that came out in the Record, I was like, who is Sister Betsy? And I literally just thought it was a real woman who maybe jumped out of planes and did extreme things. But it is not. And so we just want to answer that question today. Like, who is Sister Betsy? And can you tell us a little bit about that? So we'll probably start with the obvious question. Who is she?
Yeah, that is the question. It's funny how, you said I didn't know what this was. I didn't know what this was before getting to work with our very amazing stewardship director for the SPD, Julian Archer. And it's really his brainchild. So he had this creative vision of creating Sister Betsy and sharing it with the church to kind of inspire people about giving and stewardship and whatnot. Long story short, Sister Betsy, yes, she does jump out of planes, and yes, she is a very exciting 170-something-year-old, I think, at this point, 160-something-year-old. But she's basically a metaphor, so she's a made-up character, but she stands for systematic benevolence. And back in the day when our church began, people like to nickname it Sister Betsy. And basically, as like a really overarching concept, systematic benevolence, or Sister Betsy, is the practice of making regular financial contributions to God's mission work or to the church. So it kind of tithing sort of comes under it, but it's going in a slightly different direction, but we can dive more into that soon. But yeah, basically she's like here to help us know how to give and live that generous lifestyle. So does that answer the question, or does that create more questions?
No, it does. There is also a surfboard wax brand named Sister Betsy, so I wasn't sure if it was like initially related to that, but surf brand isn't very kosher, so I was like, I doubt it, but there's a link in the adventure sports and the Sister Betsy, but I think this is way more awesome.
Yeah, wow, that is so serendipitous. That's so cool. How random.
So why does Sister Betsy, I got to be careful how I say that, why does Sister Betsy need to come back? She was around at the beginning of the church. It was a term, as you said, coined by our pioneers, and it's quite it sounds quite cool, Sister Betsy, having this complicated idea personified, I think, is a very clever way to tackle something that may seem not that fun. Finance, finance and being intentional and donating to the church. Why now? Why is it important to have a campaign like this around this concept now in this time in the church's history?
Yeah. So that's the question, really. Like, why should we care? Obviously, a lot of people will give tithe, and that's a regular contribution. So why should I dive more into this when I'm already giving tithe or whatever? And I should mention before we start this, all of this information is kind of summarized on Sister Betsy's webpage. So you can go to the stewardship.adventistchurch.com/Sister Betsy, and you'll find it all here. But long story short, mission offerings have decreased dramatically over the past about 100 years. And that obviously makes a lot of mission work that we do very difficult, or, can limit what we're able to do in spreading the gospel overseas. I think in the last 6 months or so, I think, Jared, were you there at PNG for Christ? Yep, you were there.
Visited. I was reporting on it. I didn't actually preach, but I did experience the epic campaign that was PNG for Christ. It was crazy.
Yeah. How many baptisms were there in the end, do you know?
A lot.
Hundreds of thousands.
They're still counting them. By the end of the year, they expect they will have baptized around 300,000 people this year in Papua New Guinea. So,
wow, that's incredible. Well, yeah, like that as a case study, for example. A program like that, an initiative like that, obviously requires funding. There's a lot going on. A lot of people are there, lots of flights, lots of public campaigns, all that stuff requires funding. And so Sister Betsy is kind of, the principle of that is to increase this kind of activity around the world. But when we look at the trends in giving, so if we're comparing, mission offerings to tithe, for every $1 of tithe that is given in the church, well, actually, let me start. In the 1930s, okay, that's where we kind of have data from. For every $1 that a person gave in tithe, they were also giving 64 cents to mission offerings. So it's kind of like about a bit more than 50% of what you're giving to tithe, you're also giving to mission offerings. Today, and for various reasons, but today that number is only 3.6 cents. So we've gone from 60 cents down to 3.6 cents. So that, I don't know what percentage decrease that is, but it's significant. And so obviously that makes mission work difficult. And sure, you could probably look at, trends in giving to local church more than we give to mission. That's a massive factor. You could also look at things like, okay, well, today they have things like ADRA, like other charities that we can give to, but still, the fact that I think offerings, I don't know, I've always kind of struggled with offerings, right? Because like tithe, it's clear, it's in the Bible, you give 10%. How much do I give in offerings? Like, that's always the question. I have conversations with people my age about this all the time, like, where does the offering go? All kinds of questions around it. But yeah, systematic benevolence is back to really give a bit of a structure around offerings, and encourage people to give generously to mission, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? That's where it actually counts. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess I have a few questions. So obviously we've got tithe, and then we've got systematic benevolence or offerings. Is Sister Betsy, like, how every now and then we come to church and they say the local offering this week is for the local church, or it's for mission, or it's for education. Is there a separate one for systematic benevolence or Sister Betsy? Or is that just like called mission, or like, do we give it to how do we even go about that?
That is a great question. And I kind of misunderstood it when I first started working on this as well. Long story short, systematic benevolence, maybe I'll give a bit of history on it actually, and then I'll answer that question. So, and you can look kind of this history up in much more detail on like the Adventist Encyclopedia. So like, if you're interested, please feel free to go and read that. But long story short, when our church first started in like the 1844, and then kind of into the 1860s, 1863, I think is official. Anyway, in that period of time, obviously the Adventist church it didn't look anything like it does today. It was very much an organic movement. You had, Ellen White, James White, all of these people just going around and kind of sharing the good news of the gospel. So it was very organic, and you had a lot of sort of traveling preachers relying on the generosity of people when they arrived at their destination. And so because of that, you had two things that happened. First of all, a lot of the preachers and missionaries, I suppose, were kind of impoverished. Like they really struggled. There wasn't a lot for them, and they would have to work, you know, jobs as they traveled, and that was difficult to find, and all kinds of difficulties. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was the people who were receiving these missionaries and these traveling preachers and whatever, there were certain people that would financially support them, but the financial sort of burden was on kind of the 20%, not like it was the minority that were, you know, carrying that financial burden. And eventually over a number of years, they became weary in doing that. It was kind of like, this isn't fair. And so they stopped supporting them. And so the church founders were like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, we want this message to spread. We need to introduce a concept. And so they read the Bible. And this was before our church actually kind of knew what tithing was or put the principle of tithing in place, which is fascinating to me. Like, you kind of expect that as always being a thing, but it wasn't always a thing. Long story short, it was in 1859. The church founders, James White, Ellen White, all the others, got together and prayerfully put in place, based on a couple of passages in the scripture in 1st and 2nd Corinthians, this idea of systematic benevolence. So that's kind of where it came from. So bringing it back to now, systematic benevolence is more of a concept than it is like a specific, well, it's not a specific fund. So yeah, it's a concept. It's really designed to kind of just educate people on the fact that systematic giving, regular giving is really beneficial for the church, for God's mission work, and also has a lot of blessings to give to the individual as well. And yeah, that can be done because we already kind of do it with tithe, right? That's systematic benevolence is embedded in tithe, but we can also do it with our offerings, knowing that we're giving regularly to God's mission work. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a context history lesson for it.
And so you said 1859, which
18
is before the church was officially organized. So this concept predates the official Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's fascinating. I guess so maybe thinking about it myself to rehash what you've said just in layman's terms, you're putting aside some money. And if I'm thinking about the visiting preachers, it's like other people contribute as well. And so you've got some money. So when they rock up on your doorstep, you've got something to give. You've set it aside in a sense. Like Joseph in the years of plenty, you're putting aside some grain ready for the famine. And I guess this concept is like, so okay, to mission work or to projects that come up, to needs that happen in the church, to mission offerings, to asks that come along. It's like as a family, as a collective, as a church, you've been setting aside a little bit of funding, and all of a sudden a need comes up and there's something there to give. You've already sort of pre-saved that money. Is that a nutshell sort of version of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's a perfect summary. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And yeah, it's interesting because the two passages that like this concept was based on before they found all the other, I think it's in Micah where it talks about tithing and a few other passages in the Old Testament. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2, for anyone who's watching along at home curious. It says, now about the collection for the Lord's people. And this is Paul talking to, I guess the church in Corinth. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income proportionally, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. So the money is kind of sitting there so that, yeah, when they come, there's no questions. They just take what's there and the kitty gets refilled each week kind of thing, which is interesting. So it's like a really old concept from Paul's time that we then implemented before tithing. So there's a history there.
Yeah, that's awesome to know. There's also the verse that Betsy's tagline that she thrives on living life to the full comes from John 10:10, which says that my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. How do we kind of integrate those two? Like, how does systematic, I have to say this slowly every time and concentrate, systematic benevolence and giving, how does that give us a rich and satisfying life? Like, I think we kind of know that helping others helps us and but can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I made I don't think I have it here on the Instagram page yet. I made a carousel recently, which I wish I had in front of me because I'll probably butcher what I'm about to say in comparison. But if you want to follow When that drops, it'll be on the sisterbetsy.spd Instagram page, so that'll come soon. But yeah, there are so many benefits to giving, and I wish Julian Archer was here. He's the SPD Stewardship Director, to kind of go into this, because he is so passionate about this. But when we give generously to God, and there's so much evidence in Scripture, like money is, I don't know if it's the most talked about topic by Jesus, but I want to say I've read that somewhere. You know, Jesus talks about money a lot. Obviously, money is something that we all need to survive, right? And we all have a complicated relationship with money. But giving to the church, I know for me personally, it's an act of faith. It's an act of trust. I've definitely seen the benefits of it in my life. But I almost, I don't know, veer away from answering this question too directly, because I think it can very much get into kind of prosperity gospel territory a little bit. Like, I think the benefits are different for everyone. For some people, it will be, you know, abundance, like prosperity. For other people, it will be, you know, kind of crushing your pride and relying on God more. For other people, it will be, you know, a strengthened relationship with Jesus. For other, it's different things for everyone. But there are some very interesting testimonies coming to that Instagram page soon, actually, which, yeah, it's really inspiring to hear how systematic benevolence and just giving in general, you know, can transform people's lives and just create more and more blessings. So yeah, I know that doesn't directly answer the question, but yeah, it's a tricky one.
Well, I'm going to throw that question on Zanita, because I think she's been writing an article on generosity for Signs of the Times magazine. So do you have any info for us, Zanita, on how generosity helps our health or something like that? You know, I understand what you're saying, Maryellen, about avoiding, I guess the trap is always, I'll give this because it's going to help me, or, you know, trying to avoid that cycle of I'm giving to get, you know. But maybe Zanita has some factoids for us, or some interesting things to throw in here.
Yeah, so many things you could say. I think you're right. Like, you don't want to give just for the sake of being like, this is going to make me happy and healthy. But if you don't, then you're not going to, like, you're, I guess I'll start with this. Like, there's, I was reading one study, and it was this lady, she's like, she was the person who started, I guess, this like self-help thing around happiness. Like, I guess like 30 years ago, no one was really talking about it. And she was like at Stanford University studying it. And she said that there's like obviously hundreds of things that can make us happiness, but the top three is like gratitude interventions, which is just like being grateful for things, being generous, so like giving your time and money. And then the other one was just like interacting with people more. So they all sound pretty obvious, but it's like, I think we're always asking that, like, oh, what's going to make me happy? And there's so many different things, but they're the things that like statistically and consistently across the board like help for people. But I think it's like that. The Bible talks about this heaps. Like, you're right, Maryellen. It's mentioned, I think, like in like 50% of the parables are about money and generosity or something like that, which is
crazy, yeah.
Quite crazy. But I don't know. I think we just all have this mindset. Like, I know I do. It's like, I just want like a little bit more, or like once I buy that one thing, then I'll be more generous. It's like that also stops me from being generous, is like my own little things, or that just like small other thing that I want, or like I just want to earn a bit more and then I'll give more. Like, that's what kind of stops me. And I guess also like the obvious rise of costs and things, but I don't know. It's yeah, I guess we all kind of buy into that, or I know, speaking for myself, I buy into that lie so much that just a little bit more will be what makes me happy, instead of like giving that little bit more and like being tighter on my life and my luxuries, instead of like being generous. Yeah.
I spoke on Sabbath at Kellyville Church about they're doing a series this month on anxiety in a stressful world. And the passage they asked me to speak about was in Matthew 6, which is in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about do not worry. And basically that do not worry that we know relatively well. Sometimes we encounter like, hey, don't worry, the birds have food, the lilies have clothes, and they're beautiful, and God cares about them. He cares about you more, sort of thing. I was reflecting on that and, you know, diving into that in my studies last week. And I guess that chunk comes after a number of Jesus' teachings on money and is kind of tied. It's a triplet sort of teaching. It goes along with the, don't store up treasures on earth, store them up in heaven. Don't serve two masters, the money versus, God sort of wrestle between what are you going to do? What are you going to serve? And I guess when I was looking at some of this stuff, it boiled down to that scarcity mindset versus that abundance mindset. And Jesus had an abundance mindset. He was really expecting that God is good and that God is going to show up and do things for you. And so I guess, that I'm just reflecting, from what you guys were both saying in your answers there. What I was hearing was the trust that it takes to practice systematic benevolence it's an abundance mindset. Like, I'm not worried about tomorrow. Tomorrow will look after itself, as Jesus said. I know there'll be enough tomorrow to go around, so I'm going to put a little aside today. It's not my money anyway, it's God's money. Like, God will fill out of that abundant place. And I think that is really hard to do.
Absolutely.
It's a test of our faith. But it's hey, if we want to live like Jesus, we've got to cultivate that abundance mindset. And I think Sister Betsy maybe challenges us to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's so crazy about, that abundance mindset that Jesus had is Jesus was basically homeless. Like, he was a wandering prophet dude who slept under the stars a lot of the time. And he was able to be that abundant. And it's like, I look at my own life and the incredible blessings I have, like material blessings I have in comparison. And that's a challenging concept. Luke 16:10 says, whoever can be trusted with the small things can be trusted with the big things. And I think that is really where I find a lot of encouragement through kind of systematic benevolence and Sister Betsy, because all it's asking you to do is to proportionally, it doesn't mean you have to give like $1,000 a week to whatever cause. It's like whatever you can manage each week, you just start giving. And it's almost like a test. And actually, I think it's in the beginning of Micah, it says, test me in this, Jesus says. It's one of the only times in scripture where God tells us to test him. Test me in this, if you give to me, I will give back to you. I'm butchering the text. I can get it up if you want. But he's basically like, if you are generous to me, I will be generous to you. Test me in this. And so systematic benevolence is almost like a little sneaky way of being like, well, okay, God, I'm going to start giving to you each week this amount. I'm going to test you and see what happens. And yeah, I guess that's where the testimonies flow, right? So yeah.
See what happens, just put aside a little bit. I think also on that idea, like many people think that they're struggling just to pay like their bare necessities, but a lot of the things I think that we in the West consider bare necessities, like I think I heard a statistic recently where it was like the average woman spends like $300 a month just on like beauty things. So like moisturizers or getting their eyebrows done or like shaving or like whatever, like. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can like just like pull back, like if we just like thought about one little luxury in our life and like put that instead towards Sister Betsy, like it would all add up and it wouldn't really be a loss. Like we would probably barely notice it. But yeah, I think it just starts with figuring out what that small thing is. But I don't know, Maryellen, do you have any tips as to like how to start small, or like what are some things that we can do to kind of give that little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is probably a mindset shift before we get like super practical on it. We can touch on that, but I think a lot of us, if I was to ask either of you, like, what are your top 3 priorities in life? You'd probably say something like family, God, family, and I don't know, whatever. Like, that's what most people say. But then when I look at my own life, for example, I would say the same kind of things. A lot of the time, I'm super busy with work, and so I don't spend time with my family. Or I'm super distracted by social media, and so I don't spend time with God or whatever. So often our actions aren't actually in harmony with what we say our values are. And so this is a really good test for that, because I think with what you're saying, Zanita, like, you know, $300 a month on skincare, or, you know, whatever that thing is, probably a lot of people aren't aware of that. And a lot of people, if asked, you know, what is important to spend your money on, they probably wouldn't say that. And yet that's, you know, that's what they're doing. So it's a really great way to kind of, yeah, again, test God, but also get your priorities kind of straight and do a bit of an analysis of your life. So anyway, I guess that sort of getting your mindset straight on what is important to do with your money. And look, some people may look at this concept and be like, that's not for me. That's cool. But if you do feel convicted by it, then it's a really great place to start getting those priorities straight. Really practically speaking, I mean, we have, at least in the Adventist Church, e-giving, which is like a way of scheduling your giving, and it's super simple to set up, just a recurring weekly debit, right? So whether it's $5 a week, whether it's $50 a week, whatever, you can set up like a scheduled thing in e-giving, giving it to like World Mission Budget or whatever offering cause you feel passionate about. That's where I would start. That's where I have started, and so far, smooth sailing. Yeah, is that your question? I'm not sure.
Follow up to that, how do we find a cause? Is it something we're passionate about? Should we challenge ourselves to give to something we wouldn't normally give to? Or there are so many causes, sometimes it can be overwhelming. It's like too many options, you know, we don't know where to start. How do we start? Or should we spread it across? Or is it more impactful if each person has one thing that they do in a chunk, you know?
Yeah, this question does open up, like, it doesn't really, but maybe I'm going to go there. It does open up a bit of a can of worms. And I have this discussion with a lot of, especially Gen Z and millennials, you know, they say, where should I be giving my offering to, or my tithe to? Because I don't trust that it's going to be used in the right way, or like, you know, there's so much admin in the church levels, like I'd rather give to this or whatever. That is really challenging, and I'm not pretending to have all the answers, but again, this is a real test of faith and trust that God will use the funds for where they're meant to go. I don't know if you guys have opinions on that, maybe we can dive into it, but long story short, systematic benevolence, the reason this has been set up is what I said before. Our mission offerings are down, and the church is this incredible institution, really. And like, no matter what you say about it, no matter what qualms you have with it, and, you know, complaints, whatever, it is objectively pretty amazing that like our church is a global institution with multiple levels. And because of that, we are able to do incredible mission work in so many countries that a lot of other churches simply, or denominations simply, can't facilitate, right? They don't have the infrastructure to do so. And so, yeah, just keeping that in mind, it's like, well, the mission funds for, you know, if you give to a church like Global Mission, World Mission Fund, for example, that could be funding like homeless care packs in somewhere in Africa, or it could be funding PNG for Christ, or it could be funding like a Mission to the Cities initiative in like New York City, whatever. So that's really the heart behind this, like increase those mission funds that our church can operate. But if you're not in that place, I would encourage you to just like give to a mission-oriented cause, one that, like, you know, you feel some kind of connection to. ADRA's a good one, Asian Aid's a good one, whatever. I can't tell people what to give to, obviously, but yeah, mission is really the heart of it.
Yeah, totally.
I just want to speak to that a little bit, Maryellen, and it's like, from what I've experienced, like, there is cynicism around the church and what it can do and what it will do, but at the same time, there's an incredible amount of, at least in our part of the world, transparency and accountability in the church. There's a lot of auditing that happens, and not all the independent ministries necessarily have that. You know, not to be down on external things, but sometimes we like to do certain causes because, oh, that's closer to the ground, or that's a bit more exciting. It seems like it's being more impactful. But at the same time, some of these big, you know, global mission funds are going to projects that are, you know, making an impact. At the same time, they're very highly scrutinized projects, so they're not necessarily going to be squandered or misused. So if you have concerns about how the money and the tithes and the offerings, etc., is being used, I think, at least especially in this part of the world, it's very carefully accounted for, and that is something that we probably don't talk about enough as a church, how many checks and balances there are being part of a global organization. We're not a congregational model, an independent model where people can just use the money how they feel like getting the money. Our pastors aren't buying themselves private jets and things. That's not how the system's set up. Yeah. And so that is it should be a trust building comfort when we look at, okay, how's the money used? Well, if we take part in some of these programs, the money is at least going to be accounted for. So that, I think, is encouraging.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zanita, you were going to ask another question.
I was just going to add on that, because I think a lot of people don't know the ins and outs of where their offerings and tithes go. And we have been meaning to have a conversation about this on Record Live. So if you're interested, we'll do a full thing on it, because I think it is really interesting. And I remember when I found out like where our tithe and offerings went, I was like, oh, that's actually awesome. Like, that's so well thought out. Like, I feel like I can trust this again. So yeah. But anyway, Maryellen, we have kind of run out of time. You have kind of gotten practical with us already, but is there any final words you would like to give in regards to Sister Betsy, or anything practical or anything at all?
Well, just to, what's the word? Validate the fact that like money is a difficult thing when it comes to faith, spirituality. And if anyone's watching who it still isn't sure, like, that is so valid. We need money to survive. Jesus talks about money a lot because he knows it is such a big deal. But I guess, I'd encourage people to just check out Sister Betsy's webpage, check out her Instagram, just educate yourself more on it, see what you think. I haven't shared nearly everything that's involved with the vision behind this. And yeah, it's a really practical way to test God, and just see how generous he can be. So if that's something that interests you, try it out. But yeah.
And perhaps we can start with prayer, because that's always a good way. If you're struggling with this, I'd encourage you to pray about it. Just see if God has any special revelation for you on how you should be using your money. He might help you to see a challenge in the space of that. And that's always a good thing. Hey, Maryellen, it's so great to have you back on the program. It's been great to connect. Thank you for the work that you're doing in this campaign and all the other things. I know you've got a lot of things that you're juggling, so we appreciate the time that you've taken to spend with us today. And if you're watching, hopefully we'll be back next week with a chat with the 10,000 Toes people. Zanita will be on leave for a few weeks, so we'll miss her. But Record Live will continue in some capacity for the next few weeks. So God bless you all, and we'll see you again next week.
See you soon, everyone. Thanks, Maryellen.
Thanks, guys.